Will I be receiving an indicative wave to say go, like a grid girl go? Thank you. Much appreciated. Welcome all of you to this, the third day of the Mother/Other Festival for the Wheeler Centre, an extraordinary collaboration of international and Australian writers, thinkers and creators engaging with the birthing body, maternal figures, the perinatal health system and gendered roles in parenting. I would like to begin today by acknowledging that this event is taking place on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. On behalf of us all, I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I also recognise any First Nations people here with us today with gratitude and respect. A note to start, and just to welcome us, I suppose, to the space as we mean to go on. This is a space for people, those who have births and those who haven't, who want to discuss and consider the multifaceted concerns of mothering, one of which is necessarily children. So there are some chairs up the back if you want to feed. There's also a quiet space upstairs if you decide you'd like to move out. Our ushers can help you find it, and there's a microwave and a kettle and some more space to kind of hang out. There's a little dedicated play space there, and wherever it is you and your small people find yourself today, then that is okay with us. The big people will down-regulate as best as we can, and I don't want anyone to feel shushed out of the room, okay? Do look out for your own small people though, because as friendly as we want to be, they may feel more comfortable with people that they know, but they're certainly welcome up here on stage. It would be an entertaining break just to mess up the AV. I'd also like to recognise that as you came in, we were welcomed by music from Claire Tonti from her album Matrescence, which is available from our amazing event booksellers, Neighbourhood Books, who I welcome you to try and introduce yourself to later because they have an awesome selection for your bookshelf. This panel is being live cast, welcome to that audience, and will be available to watch later. I know that one of the concerns about events like this is that the very people who want to watch have care responsibilities and may not be able to be here, so share it widely with friends and others, or even those who you felt needed to be here but probably never would. They may be the very people who need to hear this more so than others. And most humanly, there are bathrooms at the back of the room, and we're going to chat now for about 40 or so minutes before opening the room to some questions for our panellists. But questions about what? In 2019, that Queen Cardi B said, "I thought I was going to avoid postpartum depression. When I gave birth, the doctor told me about postpartum, and I was like, well, I'm doing good right now. I don't think that's going to happen." But then, out of nowhere, the world was heavy on my shoulders. In doing so, Cardi joined the growing number of people acknowledging that pregnancy and parenthood take a toll on mental health. It impacts many women, but also men, trans and non-binary people. It impacts those who conceive and those who don't, who birth or don't or can't or aren't allowed to. It will encompass people who experience miscarriage, abortion, pregnancy loss and stillbirth. It will touch those who parent, those who care, and those who are prevented by circumstance, legislation, colonisation or intervention to continue to parent and care. And despite that wide reach and increasing acknowledgement of the impact of perinatal mental health by people famous and many who are not, it continues to come into many lives as an unwelcome surprise and remains in many quarters a taboo. Today, we are joined by mental health expert Nicole Hyatt, the founder and director of the Centre of Perinatal Excellence, COPE, whose role in the perinatal area has included the implementation of Australia's $85 million National Perinatal Depression Initiative. We also welcome, next to her in the centre, award-winning journalist and co-founder of Media Diversity Australia, Antoinette Lattouf, who is also an ambassador for mental health organisation Gidget Foundation, after experiencing postnatal depression and anxiety herself. Finally, at the end of this row of esteemed women, is Laura McPhee-Brown, an award-winning author and social worker, whose latest work, Little Plum, examines with depth and care depictions of mothers in literature and art. Please welcome our guests with a warm round of applause. Nicole, I'd like to start with you. You're a doctor in clinical psychology and founded COPE in 2013 in response to the need to develop innovative and sustainable solutions to perinatal mental health. There's a wealth of experience, no doubt, in this room with the sleepless, strange, surreal, and hopefully sometimes quite wonderful range of realities encompassed by what we might shorthand as conception, pregnancy, birth, parenting, and then some. But I feel like it would be really useful today to have some founding discussion and concepts to try and give us a sense of what perinatal mental health entails. Pre- and postnatal mental health risks, they're not limited to depression, nor are they confined necessarily to women or birthing people. So what does the baby blues mean for you, and more broadly, the work of the Centre for Perinatal Excellence?
Well, thank you very much. It's a lovely big opening to this important topic, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. Look, when we look at perinatal mental health, we often think of postnatal depression. That's probably the area that's been focused on the most and is spoken about the most. However, we know that these conditions start much, much earlier. And part of the work of COPE is to really raise awareness around the emotional challenges that people can experience at each stage on the journey to becoming a parent. For some people, that starts right at the beginning with challenges around infertility, which have a huge impact on emotional and mental health. We also know that in pregnancy, 1 in 5 women will experience anxiety in pregnancy, and 1 in 10 will experience depression. So it's really important that we identify and talk about these conditions and routinely screen women and partners ideally to identify these conditions early rather than just wait till the postnatal period when it's too late. We then have challenges around birth, high expectations, high pressures, that we're going to have this wonderful birth experience, and when that doesn't go to plan and leads to a traumatic birth in up to 1 in 3 women, we know this has long-term impacts on mental health as well. And then in the postnatal period, we also know 1 in 5 women will experience anxiety and 1 in 7 will experience postnatal depression. So when we think about the number we have 300,000 women giving birth every year in Australia, and if we stop and look at these emotional and mental health challenges that can occur at each stage of that journey, it's really important that we are aware and informed and empowered with information about these challenges, reassured that we're not the only ones going through the challenges, knowing where to get support and make sure that the health professionals are adequately trained and resourced to be able to provide that support, and then critically having access to services. And this is really what the work of COPE is. We don't provide clinical services, but we're about developing a national infrastructure to support this early support, education, screening, referral pathways and training for health professionals to make sure that we identify these conditions early and get women the support that they need, but also address the high levels of stigma. We know from our own research that 74% of women, for example, with mental health problems did not get help until they reached crisis point. So we must be looking at these different types of ways of identifying early, but also addressing that huge level of stigma. And that really represents the work that COPE does.
It's very extensive work too, and I feel in that suite of statistics that you just brought to us there, one of the things that stayed with me is to think about that 300,000 or so babies that get born each year. That's also 300,000 and then all of the other babies who aren't necessarily born, but the magnitude of this concern is not just about 1 or 2 mums or some people, and in fact is really much more of a global public health challenge. What are some, you indicated that you don't deliver clinical services at COPE, but there are certainly services, and I certainly think the national guidelines and some of the kind of electronic or app services that you offer are really important for thinking about that 300,000+ people who might need to access these kinds of services.
Yeah, absolutely. So really our work is focused on addressing those challenges. So in addition to awareness campaigns, last year we launched a national awareness campaign called The Truth, where we did extensive research with individuals about their experiences and their challenges. And the Truth campaign really is about raising awareness of people's personal experiences and helping people to identify through other people's experiences. We also have the Ready to Cope app. Now, this is a free app that you can download from Google Play or the App Store, and it gives you weekly information from 6 weeks into your pregnancy right up till the baby's first birthday. In the information that parents said, no one told me about this, no one talked about the challenges I've been facing or would be likely to be facing. So it's really that guide around all the unexpected things that can occur on that journey on a week-by-week basis to really empower parents with information and direct them to services and more information about those topics. In relation to screening, as I mentioned in the bio, previously we had an $85 million National Perinatal Depression Initiative, which I sort of coordinated through Beyond Blue. At the end of that initiative, the first thing the government of the day said was, well, where's the data? Has this been effective? Should we keep refunding it? And the answer was there was no data because we were doing pen and paper screening. They were completed questionnaires in people's filing cabinets, and we knew that lots of people with non-English speaking backgrounds didn't get offered screening. So we would never consider this acceptable for not offering diabetes screening in pregnancy or blood test screening, but this is what was happening with mental health screening. So we've developed the iCope digital screening platform that allows screening electronically. The women can do the screening on their phone prior to or at the appointment. It gives them a greater level of privacy, and we can also provide screening in 25 different languages. And importantly, the woman is empowered with information about what her screening scores mean, rather than feeling like she's doing a test with the health professional. And the final area we've really addressed is the need to identify referral pathways, and that's where we have the eCope directory, where we have other fabulous services like Gidget and Panda and great health professionals who are experts in this area. So you can do a search by postcode and find a professional or a support service in your region, because at the moment it was really potluck whether you found someone or your GP or your health professional was adequately trained. And so we provide education and training online, but also then have that directory of services so people can find the help that they need when they need it.
Nicole, that's a very comprehensive foundation, and I know that you're describing a really complex interplay of both personal, systemic, clinical, and I guess, service delivery picture that isn't always easy for individuals to navigate. And I think, Antoinette, I want to kind of bring you into the conversation now because you have done an enormous amount of advocacy, but advocacy that draws on your personal experience and really tries to think about how that awareness of symptoms or the kind of limited access to services or what patients' awareness, individuals' awareness might be, but also what the systems that they try to work through and move through look like and feel like. And I guess this is, as kind of Leonard Cohen puts it, you are addressing a room of the Explorers Club of the National Geographic Society. These people know the risks of mountain climbing. They have sleep disturbance, stress that moves to distress, strange or irrational beliefs. These things aren't a checklist on them. These are personal experiences that they've had to move through, and you've had to move through them yourself.
I have.
You're a multi-award-winning journalist. I'm going to introduce your bio, slide them in rather than read them all at once. Broadcaster, columnist, author of How to Lose Friends and Influence White People, which is available for sale at the back of this room. You're the co-founder of Media Diversity Australia and a mental health ambassador for the Gidget Foundation, a TEDx Sydney speaker and one of AFR's 100 Women of Influence. You have worked hard to earn the respect and platform that befits the seriousness of your commitments and concerns. What do you think are the most pressing issues for concern for advocacy and change in perinatal mental health? How do we stop kicking against the wind? Do you know what I mean?
That's an important and big question. I too would like to start off by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging of the Kulin Nation, and hello to people who are watching online. I also want to acknowledge the three blokes in the room. I think it's important that these conversations should not only be restricted to women. Mental health, ill mental health around children and pregnancy affects both men and women. And I know in my circumstance, I wouldn't have been able to get through what I have gotten through, or mostly gotten through, if it wasn't for the support of my partner. So I wanted to make that sort of acknowledgement. So when I identified, and I was one of the people, thank you to your work, Nicole, COPE, I did, through COPE, I did the screening test at the hospital with my second child, and there were lots of red flags. They were like, oh gosh, this woman's not okay. And so the support I started getting was at 34 weeks pregnant. And again, it was something, I hadn't even had the baby yet. I had another baby who I quite liked. And I was like, I'm having this child, I'm not sure if I'm going to like it. And I also recognised that as someone who worked as a journalist, I'd done so many stories on mental health, so I was very well informed, and I had an interest in mental health issues. I hadn't had any lived experience, so I'm thinking, I'm pretty well equipped. I'm better equipped than the layperson, I'd imagine, in terms of understanding healthcare systems. I've done so many stories, I've interviewed, I've read the policies, and yet I had no control as to how it played out on me. And I almost felt that because I was informed and privileged, and so much more privileged than my parents, who came as refugee and lived through war and trauma and poverty and all these sorts of things that were textbook trauma, I felt, well, I'm smarter than this, I'm better than this, and I don't have a reason. I didn't see anybody get assassinated like my mother did. I didn't see any of this, so why am I crying all the time? Why am I so sad and unwell? And so for me, it was navigating that, you can't read your way out of mental illness, because I thought that if you were super educated, you could. And B, that it was a little bit complex for me because mental health, discussions around mental health were so taboo in sort of the Arabic-speaking community of Western Sydney that I'm a part of. Also that culturally, family and lots of children was something to be revered and applauded. Like you were, your worth as a woman in many ways was how many children you had. And I was, had one and was really not wanting the second one, and really had no connection with my second child and felt really sad and unable to eat and sleep. But then I couldn't share that with the elders in my community because of the shame. And that when I did try to suggest that I was really unwell, it was met with criticism and judgment and just pray. And so there was this enormous amount of guilt and discouragement from seeking medical help. I was discouraged. I was told to pray. I was told that it would pass. Or, I had aunts and my mother come and they thought, they cleaned at my house and cooked so much as though big pots of food would sort me out. And so that just made me even more passionate about, as I started to get a bit better, which took a lot of work and a lot of support, a team of mental health professionals, and it's something I've never fully recovered from, in that I still live with anxiety and depression, and some of those symptoms re-emerge. I'm better at navigating it. But then it made me realise if I struggled in that process, and I'm very aware of the relative privilege I have, then how much harder would it be from other people embedded in cultural communities where they don't have the language skills, they don't have the financial means, but they're still trying to work through the stigma and being actively discouraged from talking about mental ill health. My auntie, about a year after I wrote a piece for the ABC the first time I talked about it, and it was really about feeling that I wasn't worthy of the pain because of the legitimate pain that my parents experienced through their trauma. And my auntie said to me, oh my God, you know what you described? She can't read or write. She's like, her daughter explained it to her. She's like, that happened to me. I cried every day for 3 years after my son. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's so many people who don't have support, who never have an outlet. And so what I've tried to do with the Gidget Foundation is work through how to provide culturally appropriate in-language services, there's different work to be done the more intersectional a woman is, and it needs to be led from people in the community who understand the community. Just like, no doubt, Nicole, the work you've done with COPE wouldn't be the same if it was a man doing the work. You bring your experiences as a woman, and I noticed that a lot of the public discussion around mental illness didn't include women from migrant and refugee backgrounds, and that's something that I've tried to do.
It's interesting. I often used to joke that my mum would complain that she had had postnatal depression for 17 years until we left home. But 5 years deep into being a parent, that number seems so much less unrealistic than it once did before I had kids. And you raised a couple of things that I think really resonated with me and continue to stay with me, that health literacy alone is not a determinant of a positive outcome.
Yeah.
And as much as we try to individuate that knowledge, this whole network of experience around a transition and change in life that is actually very hard. Like it is objectively hard, and then requiring people to be subjectively okay with it is a really, Jim, it's a really interesting grind for the way I think our society functions. And that sense of criticism and judgment that comes when one isn't fitting the predetermined role of what mother is. I feel like the mum, is this ultimate synecdoche, which is like this literary device where a part sits for the whole. So you begin to move through the world as mum and not a person. Do you know what I mean? And mum will take you to these events, and how is mum feeling? And those expectations of what the mum does, they hold sway over you, even if you are not a parent, even if you are not a mum as a woman.
And I think one of the things I also experienced, because in my extended family, I was the first person to go to university, first female to go to university. I didn't grow up knowing any professionals. Very poorly skilled, poorly educated refugees in my extended family, and so there were often commentary about, well, that's because you have a career, and that's because, and it was like those issues were further compounded by sort of really misogynistic and cultural gap of just going, well, maybe you'd love your child more and wouldn't have tried to harm yourself and harm your child if you didn't love your job more than you love your child. Yeah. And that's, I mean, it's just so unhelpful. And so it was so damaging.
And too, I think resonates in so many different cultural and other contexts, the way that motherhood is designed almost to cancel out other forms of personhood. Do you mean a person who works, who navigates through the world, who advocates for others? Do you mean so much of what your work is doing is about elevating other voices? Those things are generous acts. Do you know what I mean? They're not self-aggrandising career goals about running a Fortune 500 company.
Yeah, absolutely.
Laura, I want to bring you into this discussion, and I hope this is an okay way to describe you, but you are not currently a parent. But you have written this vibrant and detailed character who is a parent. And I want to try and think with your kind of writer hat and your social worker counsellor hat on, because you also have experience with Panda, who's one of the other, this kind of trio of organisations that really work in this particular area. But I want to think about some of those narratives of the mum who always loves her kids, the mum who is giving, for whom work is a subsidiary interest, for whom unpaid drudgery is a salve and a joy. I'm not that mum. About what these narratives can do to kind of catalyse change or increase awareness, not just in the individual sense, but in ways that hopefully support people who are trying to undertake the complicated act of bringing people into the world. Screening and treatment, there's so much evidence around that, particularly in the biomedical framing. But there are also, I mean, we could bring down the patriarchy a little earlier if we wanted, but we are also bombarded by a range of images and a range of dialogues about what these ideal archetypes are. And I think about like Esther Greenwood from Sylvia Plath's Belger, and then Holden Caulfield, and these kind of like two depressive archetypal characters, and one is like a candidate for hysteria and must be shunted off, and the other is the gateway to existential revelation. Do you know what I mean? Women's depression is not the gateway to existential revelation about what it means to be, and yet that question of like what it means to be, what it means to bring a person into the world, the responsibilities that you undertake, they in many ways are existentially challenging and of existential gravity and philosophical worth. You're in Little Plum. The protagonist is a woman who falls unexpectedly pregnant after a brief romance. Can't believe I said romance with that tone. I don't feel that way about romance. But anyway, and she continues her pregnancy while also living with obsessive compulsive disorder before eventually experiencing some more acute mental health, about which I am only being coy so as not to spoil the pleasure for readers who might want to go on that journey with that character, because I think that's very worthwhile to do. But when you think about characters like Coral and why you wrote about her, what do you think her experiences bring to contemporary Australian understandings of perinatal mental health?
Yes. Thank you. I just wanted to start by...
It's also for sale here at Neighbourhood Books.
It is.
Yeah.
I wanted to acknowledge and thank the traditional custodians of the land we're meeting on and the land that I write on and live on. And thank you so much for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure. So I wanted to write Coral. I don't know that I knew why when I started, but my novel starts with the line, "This story is about Coral." And I think that through my work at Panda, through my kind of experience of being a woman in the world, I've seen that when someone becomes pregnant, when they are on their journey towards becoming a parent, and in particular becoming a mother, I think in a way they disappear, and it's all about the baby. And I wanted to kind of look at the fact that Coral is still a person. She's still, experiencing the world in her specific way, and there's kind of this really important thing going on where we're saying that perinatal mental health is, something that lots of us struggle with, but it's a very unique thing as well, and every parent's journey, every mother's journey is their journey and their reality. And so I kind of just wanted to show that nobody else knows what's going on for you. You know what's going on for you, and that's really important, and that's what we need to listen to. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it does.
Yeah.
I guess it's kind of unpiecing the person from the mother.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I think sometimes the image of babushka dolls kind of came to me, that I felt like I became pregnant and then this other doll came around me and I became a pregnant person and then I became a mum, and the bit that was me got smaller and smaller until it was that last jangly little pea that remained inside all of those dolls. I wonder, this is a little bit of an unusual structure to take. So often what happens is that this group of wildly intelligent and interesting women and myself, I get to ask all of their questions. But I also feel like this is a really unique panel in the sense that people have a mixture of professional, clinical and I guess political experiences. And it might be a chance for us to take questions earlier, and then I have a whole bunch of other questions to ask there, but also to invite this group to ask questions of each other. Antoinette,
Yes,
you started to say something.
I did. I'm not sure how familiar people in the audience are with Panda. Does anybody know the Panda hotline? Yeah, so I just wanted to make an observation and then pass a question, because I called Panda at my absolute worst. I am that statistic that reached out when it was almost too late. And the enormous amount that you share with a counsellor is, I can't even talk about it without getting upset. How much did those conversations that you had with many women like me inform your books?
Oh,
I'll just cross that off my list of questions.
I mean, completely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Because I worked at Panda for 5 years. I was a telephone counsellor for 2 of those years, and then I was a supervisor, and I heard hundreds of stories a day. I was deeply, involved with, and it starts to make me cry, deeply involved with many parents' stories, and they were all inside me. They're still there, but I was saying in the green room before, I didn't realise at the time, but I wrote Little Plum to kind of consolidate and work through all of those stories, because I'm going to cry. It's and I still have a lot of a lot to work through, because it was, you know, it's such an honour and a privilege. And as I said, you know, to sit with a parent, particularly a mother who's not well and needs someone to be there and hear her, and to have that time to actually want and be able to listen to what's really going on and stand next to her. It's just such an incredible honour, and also it's so important, and you know, a lot of services and a lot of people don't have the time, and so you know, I got to know people's stories so well, because that's the only way I believe that you can actually treat and work with someone who's unwell in the perinatal period. And so yeah, I just wanted to write about that with one person's story, but kind of it's everyone's story. Yeah. So thank you for asking that. Yeah.
I too have also been a caller from Panda, and I think one of the to Panda, and to a range of other services, to be honest. But I think that one of the things that was most striking to me during the pandemic and during some of the more pronounced lockdowns was just what that truism that it takes a village, what that really, really must have looked like. That even in the period of privilege or health literacy or language competency, or even with the presence of services, I think that some of the most acute challenges that I faced were often alleviated by people who reached out and were like, "Are you doing okay?"
Yeah.
And then in a world where for 23 hours a day you were often not okay, or not able to be outside or in the world and be okay. I found out I was pregnant with my second baby on the day that they declared a pandemic, and I certainly experienced even more acute anxiety as a result of that. I really think that that was a kind of quite hidden burden for those women who navigated the perinatal health systems without having any preceding knowledge of what those services might have looked like in a face-to-face context. So
just that village thing. Sometimes the village can be a barrier as well, because after I've pretty much cried on every platform possible. I was on You Can't Ask That and shared my story, and it's hard to, but with every time that conversation is shared, there are so many others from even more marginalised communities than my community who reach out sometimes, and usually the stories they share is that village is part of the problem. That village of living with mother-in-law or extended family, or that village of expectation makes treatment harder. Makes their experience harder. So yes, it's a village can be a wonderful thing, and I can't imagine for what isolated new mothers in COVID experienced. But this is where the complexities, the intergenerational cultural complexities come into place.
But also I think a desire to really empower, birthing people, pregnant people, others, to really self-define what that village looks like.
Yeah,
I think that sometimes the automatic prescribed village is not always the same one, and it can be for those without a village or without any of those kind of cultural networks, it can be devastating. But I think within any deeply prescribed norm that requires women to behave a very specific way is a place where the lived reality, the messiness, the day when it is not good, the down that is, or the ultra up, any of those places that fall out of that norm, women, I think, find themselves deeply, deeply penalised and ostracised. You have other questions, but I know that there's folks who've got hands up, and I meant to see a Wheeler Centre person wielding a microphone. That was the cue on my notes. Even just a tiny little note just to say, I know that we don't all use the same language, and that some of the language that we have here is intrinsically guided by the expertise, the professional background, the biomedical grounding. Don't feel embarrassed to use other language, and just let's be generous and kind with each other about what has meaning for you now. So would those hands go back up, and maybe the Wheeler Centre folk can find you again? And if you want to, you can introduce yourself, you don't have to, but then the people who are online can know who you might be, and you can nominate who you'd like to address your question.
Wonderful, thank you. Hello, I'm Claire Tonti, and I wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we are on today.
And your beautiful music.
Oh, thank you. I'm not going to sing a song, I'm going to ask a question. Thank you for this. I experienced, I think, undiagnosed postnatal depression, and I wanted to ask specifically, and I'll direct it to Nicole, but I'd be interested in all of your opinions on this. I believe that there's a piece about breastfeeding here that is impacting so many women's mental health, and I really struggled, and I turned everywhere to get help, and the help that I turned to maybe wasn't always very helpful. I think I actually needed someone to say, it's not working for you and you need to formula feed. Mm-hmm. And when I finally did, after months and months of pumping, I remember being told, just pump, express, give them that milk, give them as much breastfeeding as you can, then formula feed. Do that every 2 hours on rotation.
But then after you do that, there's no time for anything else.
Right. And it wasn't like, and then go to bed for 8 hours. It was do that forever, basically. And then we'll weigh your child, and then we'll kind of look at you with a raised eyebrow, like, well, you're not feeding them right. And my son had undiagnosed reflux as well, and no one would believe me. He ended up with an ulcerated esophagus, and it wasn't until I fought for that diagnosis at 6 months old. So I think there's a real piece here about women not being believed when they think something is wrong with their child, or when breastfeeding isn't going the way that people want us to. So I'd be so interested, Nicole, in your opinion. That's not really a question, it's more a general statement, I guess.
Look, breastfeeding always comes up at forums, and in fact I would call it one of the pillars of guilt around perinatal mental health. Being able to conceive naturally, your birth experience and breastfeeding would be the 3 pillars of guilt. And I think it's also very political and controversial. For example, we have on our website information about if you are struggling with breastfeeding, and that it's okay if you choose not to breastfeed, and we've been told by organisations we must take that information down. And we believe that from an emotional and mental health point of view, that is just compounding the guilt, compounding the mental health impacts. It always comes up in research. Women being offered support if they do want to breastfeed, but also being allowed and supported if they choose not to breastfeed. And if breastfeeding is not working for you, that is totally okay. It doesn't make you any less of a mother. So I do think it's very much tied with the whole concept of motherhood and success of motherhood. We also know from research that if someone has had a traumatic birth experience, they feel like they've failed at birth, so their need to succeed at breastfeeding is even stronger, because they're trying to prove to themselves that they are still a good mother. And then, of course, the traumatic birth does impact on breastfeeding as well. So that becomes even a more compounding mental health impact. But instead of at a time where women need support from their health professionals, we do find that there is a lot of political pressure and pressure for health professionals to, at all costs, push breastfeeding. So I totally understand where you're coming from. It is absolutely a major issue, and we try and address it as much as we can on our website to really give people feel empowered with whatever your decision is, that's okay, and you are no less of a mother either way. But I'm sure the others would find that similar themes in your work.
I just want to acknowledge that sounds like it would have been a really tough time. Like those first 6 months are hard enough as they are, as it is. Thankfully, I had a psychiatrist who kind of said to me, look, I shouldn't be saying this, but I think you should stop breastfeeding. She kind of whispered it, and I felt that having the permission. And I'm at the other end. I had physically, everything was working. Like, I had no issues breastfeeding, but my anxiety and my sadness and my panic was so bad. She's like, I actually don't think it's good for your child to be on you when you are that in that state. They need to be hugged and loved by other family members. So that liberated me in a way, and I was so fortunate for it, because I felt like somebody gave me permission to fail. And in an ideal world, yes, in an ideal circumstance, we'll breastfeed till they're 14 or whatever people want. But sometimes you're not dealing with ideal circumstances. But I hear you and I feel you, and I'm sorry you experienced that.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm going to just going to cry. I've been crying all weekend. But it's that permission. It's permission to say you're unique, your experience is unique, and how you feed your child is uniquely for you. And also, you matter. You know, it's not just your child matters, but so do you. And you know,
I would argue that the mother matters the most.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or the birth parent matters the most, because if she's not okay, if they're not okay, the baby's not going to be okay anyway. So, and fed is best. Yeah.
And you know your baby better than anyone else to know what's working and not working. So we need to give permission for women to find what works for them without that judgment and shame and stigma that we put on mothers and make them feel worse at an already incredibly vulnerable time, which is impacting on their mental health at a time when we should be supporting them as much as we can.
Yeah.
Do you know,
I've just gone through... Sorry.
No,
I was just going to say, you've just gone through a pregnancy where you've been poked and prodded and everyone's got an opinion about your body and what's happening, and then you've got to do this. It's just...
Nicole, can I ask a little follow-up question to that? What kind of receptivity do you think exists in clinical communities? I'm going to say this as like clinicians, doctors, maternal child health nurses, psychologists, whomever it might be, because just reflecting, Antoinette, on that kind of sotto voce permission. I feel that in many ways the general population is at least starting to talk more, and women are beginning to say things like, it's kind of crummy, it feels weird, I'm not super attached, I don't know if I feel like a great mum, I feel deeply ambivalent about it, feels bad for the planet. Like a whole range of diverse ambivalences have become much more acceptable in a public forum. But when you re-enter that system, or enter that system perhaps for the first time, I was shocked and astonished by how prescriptive that vision of myself as I moved through that system. And I was like, I had no idea how totalising it would be. What is it that, where do others who work, I suppose, in the more formal aspects of GPs, hospitals, maternal child health nurses and others, where do they seek insight and I guess challenge some of those assumptions around what it means to treat women and others who birth as whole people?
Well, this is where education and training, I think, is so important. And, you know, there's lots of guidelines about different things. There's guidelines about, you know, gestational diabetes. There's guidelines around breastfeeding, and they are pretty much, and I think that's where a lot of health professionals get their information, which is correct, but they also need to be in the context of the woman or the person in front of them. And yes, the guidelines might say that breastfeeding is optimal, but that doesn't mean it's optimal for everyone. And this is why it's so important that we also equally educate health professionals, and that's why COPE develops the National Perinatal Mental Health Guidelines to give that mental health perspective and understanding when making clinical decisions and providing advice about considering the woman and the context of the woman and what else is going on. We shouldn't have to be whispering, don't say that I said this, because this was what was best for Antoinette at the time. It's making a decision, a clinical judgment decision based on the person in front of you. Not just one set of guidelines that said this is how it should be for everyone, or this set of guidelines. We always must also make sure mental health is part of that context when making any decisions or having conversations about what is best. And often I think health professionals, until more recently, have been very much well trained in the physical aspects of perinatal care, but not so much on the mental health. And that was another reason for really developing COPE and why we have free education and training for health professionals, to make sure they have that mental health context and information when providing that advice, and the way they give that advice as well.
That's what I found. I did the parenting, the birth classes through the hospital at a major hospital in Melbourne. And I was 29, I had no other friends who had kids, so I just entered it in like I do with a lot of things. I'll work hard at it and I'll just do it well. And the beautiful midwife, who I think was a lovely person and had a really lovely breastfeeding experience, said to me and the group of new parents, all women can breastfeed, some women just can't hack the pain. And I wrote that in my diary like, because I was like, as a good student, I thought, yep, I
Yeah,
can.
you're going to nail that one. Just tick it off. when you
Right?
can, yeah.
Like, I just try hard. And that is so damaging, and I'm sorry if that's triggering for anyone in the room. But that, now, 7 years on, I can look at that and go, we need to do better in the way we're speaking to new parents before they even get to the point where they have to breastfeed or have a baby.
Yeah.
Thank you for your work.
May I open to another question? I apologise that I've now lost track of where the other person's hand was
Oh,
up.
there's one there and a couple at the front.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Emily. Thanks so much for this session. I will get to a question, I promise. I just want to kind of get there with a little bit of context. So I've had 4 pregnancies and 3 babies in the last 5 years, which have dovetailed with various lockdown measures in Melbourne. And I want to thank you, Eleanor, for your comment about the ambivalences about motherhood and also the existential gravity of the kind of mental health challenges that those pregnancies have brought about, because I genuinely feel like, and I would be interested in the panel's views on whether or not some of the most extreme times of depression and anxiety that I've experienced are not completely understandable in the context of how much women have to grapple with in terms of the I guess, reformation of one's identity, a reckoning with one's ego, the navigation of internalised standards that our society perhaps has put upon us that have maybe served us until the point of the reckoning with those being dissolved by what motherhood does to us. And so when my sort of depression reached its absolute peak and I was with my second son at a private hospital in a mother-baby unit, which, by the way, was only really moderately effective in treatment, but I really found that being in a room in that situation in a hospital pathologised what would otherwise perhaps be a completely understandable point to find oneself if we had a better way to speak about. And I don't want to say it's normal to feel bad, but it is normal to feel bad. And I'm just wondering if anyone has any ideas about how we can talk about our experiences, not in a way that terrify people who aren't parents yet, but that, I guess, yeah, I don't know. I'll end there. I know that's not necessarily a question, but...
Would you like anyone in particular to start with the question?
Oh, not really. Some people were nodding. Did you have a thought, Nicole?
Yeah, look, this is exactly what the Ready to Cope guide is all about. It's about giving people permission to understand that, what might be... lots of things can happen and they'll be different for every person. But just by being aware of what's coming, you can stop and think about, well, what do I want that to be? And when do I know... what can I put in place to prevent things getting in a bad place? But also understanding about everyone comes with different risk factors. So having insight into what those risk factors might be for you and what can you do about them. Some things you can do something about, something you can't. But unless you've got this insight and understanding about all these things that are going on and what role you can actively play, we're all just sort of moseying along, hoping nothing goes too bad, and then when things do go bad, we've got this ideal about what it should be like, so we deny that it's not really bad and feel like we're failing because we're not managing it like everyone else can, or seems to be. But the truth is, most other people are also struggling, but they're too, for fear of judgment, they're not talking about their real experiences either. So that's exactly what the Ready to Cope guide is all about. It's about being aware and informed about what can happen and what role you can take in being proactive about that. But also the things that you can't change, what can you do about that, and when is it time to get help for certain things, and identifying early signs and getting help early rather than waiting until things have got too much.
And I think the good thing with a service and a platform like Cope, there are so many different challenges around being a mother, and not everything comes down to a mental health diagnosis. It can just be that you need help with settling, or whatever it might be, or you're having a bit of a tough time. Some of the issues around that is because everybody is an expert on parenting and children. Like even, little old Italian men at the bus station will give me unsolicited advice. Like very sweet, but shut up. And sometimes it can minimise it. It'll be like, oh yeah, I remember I didn't sleep for 4 years either when I had children.
Get over it.
Yeah, and I'd say to people, I can't sleep. And when I say I can't sleep, my anxiety and my panic is so high, I go through the night and do not sleep. That is a little bit different to, yes, babies wake you up a lot. And so I think what happens is we have this conflating and mixed messaging. It's like, it's okay, baby blues do happen at 7 or 8 days. That is different to finding no happiness for weeks on end. Losing joy in things that, finding no joy in things that used to bring you joy, being unable to have a shower or care for your child, they're different. And so I don't know what the answer is, and I think having service provided, a directory of service providers in some way. You can have a problem breastfeeding, you can have a problem settling, you can have fully fledged postpartum psychosis. They're all valid and different, and they just need to be responded to individually.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful. I think what I'm taking from what you're saying is that, moving forward, a deflattening and a more diverse kind of representation of motherhood would then perhaps coalesce with people being believed more in what they're reporting or experiencing.
That's
and
right.
then it not being pathologised or it not being...
Or minimised or whatever
Either way,
it is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Emily, I'm going to move to a couple more questions, but I would say too that I have really felt that I have learned so much from my experiences of being a parent, but in ways that deeply challenge so many other aspects of how our society functions, where predictability, control, and an individuated choice are some of the greatest touch points about what we think it means to be functioning well, and that mothering and parenting and birthing, they're all things that require change, unpredictability, volatility, release, humility, and those things are not just in the parenting space considered an anathema to good functioning as a member of this society. And I think that the more we can do to challenge that narrative that says, I'm in charge, I got this. I was like, no, I don't. I don't put anything. Like, I am, indivisible from all of this mess.
Can I quickly add one thing before the next question? Sorry. One of the reasons people say it's often really hard to share, and there have been some times when I've gone, why am I revisiting this, or I'm having a relapse or whatever it is. One of the main reasons I do share my experiences, because I'm one of the people who, if you were to look at my life, you'd be like, yeah, she's got this. She'll be nailing motherhood. She's got a big family, supportive partner, all of the resources, blah, blah, blah. And it was a photo 2 weeks after giving birth where I was so thin. I was probably the skinniest pregnant woman you've ever seen. I was so unwell. People were like, oh my God, babe, amazing, you've bounced back. And I was like, insomnia, anxiety, and mass depression is the reason I look like this. And there is this real desire to be the unicorn mother who does everything with the spotless house. And I just wanted to know, I wanted to let people know that what they were seeing was not real, and that I was an absolute mess trying to find my way back.
There's a couple more questions here at the front. Can I ask our interlocutors to help?
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I really resonate with that last question as well. My question's about the workplace. So part of it's already been discussed, the challenge to your identity. I just found that incredibly tough, the physical, mental, emotional shifts of pregnancy and how that impacted what I could do at work. And speaking to other women, it seems like often it's addressed in secret with the manager, and it's, shh, don't tell anyone that you can't do as much as before. And I just wonder what you think about part of this deflattening. I just really got the sense more than ever that being equal in the workplace means being like a man.
Yeah.
And therefore hiding this huge transition. So that's my question. What could the workplace do better to actually not just normalise, but I have a dream that we actually validate these skills and that it's not time out of the workforce, it's time of supercharged upskilling.
Yeah. I think that's an excellent question. We have so far to go when it comes to workplaces and supporting parents in the workplace. And that's an area that we're really looking into now and have done a little bit of work in. I think the first thing we need to do with workplaces is educate the workplace about what people are going through and what parents need and what their experiences are and how the workplace can support them. Again, it shouldn't be a hush, don't tell anyone because then I have to give this to everyone, and we can't manage that. We need to look at educating parents in workplaces, colleagues in workplaces about what parents' experiences might be like and how they can support, how managers can also support them, whether that's flexibility or whatever it might be, and also policies, looking at policies within the workplace and how are they supporting parents. You know, give a busy mum a job and it will be done. I remember, you know, when I had my kids and I started, you know, you are so efficient when you go to work. There's no sitting around in the tea room and talking about what you did on the weekend. You're in there, you're getting the job done and getting out there to pick up the child at childcare. And we need to, I think you know, you become really efficient and you've got all these other life skills as well, which I don't think are really acknowledged or built upon in workplaces as well. But we need to start with educating the workplace around not only what the needs of parents are, but what that brings, what that can bring to the workplace in a really positive way. And I think we haven't even really started that conversation in a meaningful way at a big level yet.
I feel like we could spend a whole hour on that alone. I'll just say two very quick things. I think the pandemic showed that workplaces can be agile in a way that they said they couldn't before. I mean, there are other things to iron out there that, you know, women were disproportionately doing the homeschooling and their jobs on Zoom and doing folding the washing with the camera off. Like, we were just kind of doing it all. There have been some moves with paid parental leave being shared equally with 26 weeks. There are some policy things that are happening. We should often look to Scandinavia because their workplace participation, access to free childhood education. There are answers. We know how to level this playing field, but it's just whether there's the political will to. At a personal level, I think women need to talk more to each other about what they're doing, about what's working for them, what they're earning, what they've managed to do, because the more that this isn't secret business, I think the more strength and autonomy we have. The other thing I would say is I've written a book about diversity and inclusion and what works and what doesn't work. The big corporations like Deloitte, they've just passed, for example, they'll pay a woman 5 days to work 4 days. This isn't some, we're throwing you a pity payday. It's because they're recognising the immense reward society, businesses, that everybody actually benefits. When we get beyond the prejudices that we've been taught from a very young age, organisations are better, they thrive, they're more profitable and innovative when you have diverse people. Similarly at home, men, their mental health is more enriched when they have a greater, more time to spend with children. So we need to have better conversations about everybody kind of wins. This is not what douchebag ScoMo said, like, we don't elevate women at the expense of bringing men down. I was like, dude, I don't know how you were allowed to leave the country, but that's not how it works. And I think we're still at the point where we have to shift that perception that someone is suffering when women have more access to power. Sorry, and I'm going to get off my soapbox.
No, it's just, was there one last question? Just one last question here. I'm going to let us run a little bit over time. I'm going to hope that we still have time to make it to the free soapbox down at the Moat for Jacinta Parsons' reflection on ageism and ageing. So it's at 1:15 downstairs, and you can always come back here to talk about mothering bodies at 2 p.m. with me and some other awesome guests. So quickly, that was a bit of outro housekeeping.
Hi. I think this is more a statement than a question, but I'm interested in your views. I'm passionate about all things mother. I'm lived my own mother journey myself. I'm also a perinatal psychotherapist, have been for about 30 years. So I've heard an awful lot of mother stories, and even just listening to what everyone's saying today makes my heart pound, because it's such a profound experience being a mother, and it's so undervalued, which frustrates me incredibly. But I think one of the things that I often think about is not only the mental health of the mother, but the mental health of the infant, and the fact that that infant is going to grow up one day and potentially be a mother. And I work with those women who have come from postnatal depression and the impact that that's had on their lives. And I, really think we have to think so much more about how do we make lives better for mothers? How do we recognise the profound nature of being a mother so that we can help these infants to grow into mothers who can do the job that needs to be done? And when I think that these people are ruling our world. We are producing the next generation of people. We could make a much better world if we could just support those mothers in the beginning.
It's a very lovely note to end on, so thank you. I want to recognise also too that the conversations across today and this panel and then others may include references to all kinds of realities, including mental health. I also want to say that if you individually feel like you need support, the 3 organisations flagged here, COPE, Gidget and Panda, are fantastic resources to start with. But also, particularly on COPE, there is a national directory that you can search for your area to try and find services that would be accessible to you too. Before we leave, very slightly over time, I want to ask you to join me in thanking mental health expert Nicole Hyatt, the founder and director of Centre of Perinatal Excellence, with a warm round of applause. Beside her, award-winning journalist and ambassador for the Gidget Foundation, Antoinette Lattouf. Please find her book at the back here. And last but certainly not least, Laura McPhee-Brown. Both of her books are at the back here, Little Plum included. Worker, writer, social worker, please thank her. I am Eleanor Jackson, and as I said, it would be a pleasure to be rejoined by you here to talk about Skin in the Game, about mothering bodies and pregnant bodies with April Helen Horton, Lethal Singleton Norton, and Frankie Van Can. All right, all the best. Thanks.